The United States is marking the 400th anniversary of the forced arrival of enslaved Africans in what were then the English colonies. Even though slavery wasn't finally abolished until nearly 250 years later, the racial divisions it created still have not fully been healed. Joining us in the studio is Martin Sanders, who recently reflected on how this dark chapter in America's history shaped his own life and that of his ancestors. Martin, we really appreciate you being with us. In your article, you describe your relationship with America as it's complicated. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so I read a lot of the articles in the New York Times, Project 1619, and it made me really start to think about what are some of the things that formed my thinking of America and my family's thinking. And so my family was enslaved in Meade County, Kentucky, and there was some tension that my great-great-grandfather was able to, he was a farmer and he was a horse showman, and he bought some land. So he was able to build a life for himself, the American dream, if you will, but they were segregated in the neighborhood where they had to live. There were lots of limits on his life. So there's this complication in that one part that, yes, he was able to do things that went well, but in the other part it was, extremely difficult.
And where do you feel we are today on this 400th anniversary? And maybe you can draw on some of your own experiences too, because in the article you say your experiences are not drastically different from that of your ancestors.
Yeah, so today I would say that we still live in very segregated communities. I myself grew up in a segregated neighborhood, as I mentioned in the article. I went to schools that were segregated. I was a teacher in the Bronx and I taught in a very segregated neighborhood. So while there has been progress and the fact that emancipation occurred, but there are still these relics of slavery that exist in our society that as Americans we have yet to really talk about or to reconcile. So
the 13th Amendment ended slavery in the U.S. What do you think is next for the pursuit of equality and civil rights for all?
Yeah, I think that there's a legislative aspect that needs to happen, but I also think that there needs to be a cultural shift. And the conversation around slavery and the legacy of slavery is a difficult one to have. Part of me feels that only Black people are willing to have that conversation. One of the interesting things that the 1619 Project talked about in one of the articles by Matthew Desmond, he talked about how for poor white people who worked as the overseers of slaves, that slavery for them became, at least I'm not a slave, even though they had low wages, dismal working conditions and things like that. So we started to think of freedom or of equality as, at least it's not slavery, as opposed to thinking of it as more plentiful.
Well, Martin Sanders, we really appreciate you coming on and sharing your thoughts with us. Thanks for that.
Thank you.